All right, I want to change things up a bit now, as I said, and get into talking about animals. One of the things that the guidelines from the AAA said that you would have read if you read the reading for this week, which was the guidelines from both, is that you should take care of animals. Right? The ASA notes that are very common on the checklist is, among the competing duties, obligations, and conflicts of interest, the need to make implicit or explicit choices, one is care of animals. Now, obviously, there's a wider issue. But ASA says that anthropologists must do everything in their power to ensure that the research does not harm the safety, psychological well-being, or survival of the animal species with which they work. Okay? What does that mean? When I think of animals these days, immediately I think of my research areas. The first of which is the Delta in the Sundarbans in India. The Mekong Delta is the second area. So the two Delta areas, one the Sundarbans, which is the Ganges. The biggest river in India is the Ganges, the Ganga. And the delta at the end of that river is called the Sundarbans. But the Sundarbans is really different to the Mekong Delta. Right? The Mekong Delta is full of people and industry. Rice mostly, but also sugar and technologies and so on. The delta in the Sundarbans is really not very well populated. Those people that live there are villagers, fisher folk, and anyone who's migrated into the area has really been pushed out by the government. Why? Because the Indian government has been keen to have the support of the World Wildlife Fund. The World Wildlife Fund and other pro-animal agencies. Pro-animal agencies like those that support tiger sanctuaries. Where are our tigers? So in Bengal, the tiger is a political animal. So please, less disruption. All right? It's really hard to do that and unfair on others. Tigers are political in Bengal because, well, the symbol of the area, but also because for generations, villagers have had a relationship with tigers. Okay, so what is our relationship with animals? Humans and animals. We should think of them together. For example, right now there are however many thousands of organisms inside your body consuming your lunch. Without those bacteria that are not human beings, right? They can live outside of us as well. Without those creatures, you would not be able to live. You are in a symbiotic relationship with other living organisms. Right? Without them, you don't survive. Not just your stomach. Also, you think of the bees. Bees, right? You know about why it's an issue? Bees, the work that bees do. Think of Marx, right? Labor. the work bees do to keep us alive and part of our system. Without bees, if we didn't have bees, you know there's a thing called colony collapse disorder. Which means that the beehives, right, all the bees living inside these colonies, the bees are leaving, going to pollinate flowers, but they are not coming back. They are going from the hive into the fields or where the flowers are, whatever, and then they can't find their way back, and the colony collapses and dies. And this has been happening not just all over, but in massive industrial proportions, because bees are used as a part of industry now. Bees are not natural in any way now. There are, in America, in large farming areas, in Germany, in Australia, probably in Vietnam, I don't know. Farming is done on such a scale that there aren't enough bees to pollinate the flowers. Hey, please, I can't concentrate if you're going to talk. Right? Across the aisle. If you want to chat, go outside. I mean, it happens far too much. You've got to show respect to each other. Right? Some people are trying to concentrate. Has meant that there isn't enough bees occurring naturally to pollinate the fields and fields of wheat or whatever crop, rapeseed or whatever. So farmers have got together, some companies have formed to deliver thousands and thousands of bees to farms week by week. The hives are put on the back of a lorry and driven from farm to farm. They park them at this farm for a week. The bees go out, do their pollination thing. They come back. Then they move the hives the next week, the next farm. It's like a service to pollinate your crop, so you get another crop the next year. But since the last 15 years or so, these crops, these hives on the trucks have been collapsing. And no one knew why. Still, they're not sure. It's either because of pesticides used in the farming industry, or it could be the frequency of new radio telephony, right? Not Wi-Fi, but 4G, 5G. It's not clear why, but what happens if we don't have bees? You know? If we don't have bees, what will happen to us? You won't eat honey, right? What else? Can you think what else? What happens if we don't have bees? We don't have flowers. What happens if we don't have flowers? We don't have food. We don't have any food. Because even cows, right, we eat beef or pork, but they eat vegetables. If we don't have flowers, we don't have vegetables. If we don't have vegetables, we don't even have cows. We don't have anything to eat or anything to wear. Like our whole lives are dependent on natural processes and animal life. We are in a symbiotic relationship with the animal kingdom. But we don't pay enough attention to it. In the Sundarbans, because of the World Wildlife Federation Wildlife Fund, wanting to protect tigers, they have put tigers in front of people and forced people out. When people can actually live with tigers, they have done so for a long time. Okay, in the Mekong Delta, it's the other way around. The tigers have gone. Tigers used to be in the Delta, but long ago, they were also forced out because of weight of numbers of people. And of course the tigers were aggressive. They ate some people, not good for a relationship, but they have mythologies to talk about this, and you should be careful. And okay, tigers are a bit more aggressive when you've squeezed them into a smaller and smaller area of land. But still, I think of this, and I think of the labor of animals as well. Do they contribute to value? Like, are they tools or are they also exploited workers? All sorts of ambiguous issues. Are you for the solution to the relationship between animals and tigers that you see in the Mekong Delta, or the one in the Sundarbans? Both are going too far to the extreme. So the guidelines apply differently in different situations. Right? You would have to not cause, you can't just say cause no harm to animals. Well, you certainly can't say that if you're not a vegetarian, but still, you can't say cause no harm to animals. You have to look at the context and decide, is it causing harm to animals to herd them into a sanctuary area, which turns them into predators in a different way to when they roam more widely? Or are you doing harm to people? Some people, they say, like hundreds of people were killed for moving into the Sundarbans area in an incident in 1975 in India. So these guidelines, they can't be a list of do and don't, because it changes according to situation. So I want you in your final to be thinking about that when you do field work, when you do, I'm asking you to imagine yourself doing some ethnographic field work on your favorite topic. You don't have to do the actual work, just think of the method, how you will do it. Do ethical questions come up for you? And how do you resolve them? Whether it be animals or whether it be photography. Okay, we have a quite nice photograph of this tiger. How did you take it? You snuck up to this tiger and just went, smile. No, he looks like he's about to eat the photographer, right? I worry for what happened to the photographer. I really worry what happened to that photographer. But the ASA guidelines talk about photography. They say photography, both still photography and film, is a very important tool of anthropological inquiry. Sure, in Condominus's book, you're able to see photographs from the 1950s of the people, right, in Saluk, and what they do, and rituals and death ceremonies and all sorts, right? And Evans Pritchard's photographs, remember, of cattle and of women, and Malinowski taking photographs. Where photographs are taken, moreover, in the case of large public events, filming should always be overt. What does overt mean? Not covert. Covert means hidden, overt, open. Now, I think things have changed a lot since we all got a movie camera in our pockets, right? So now we have a different attitude to the camera. Right? Previously, I think 20 years ago, if I talked about this and I started to make a little film of the class, people would really have objected. Now, just a little bit, you just kind of sit up a bit more straight. Sometimes you go like that. I'm not really doing so. But if I did, I know that you would handle it differently than a class would 20 years ago, because they would be much more surprised. Also, the camera would be this big, I would have a tripod, it would not be, I couldn't pull a movie camera out of my pocket. Right? So the game has changed. So many more photographs than we used to take. Even if you were into film, and shot a lot of negatives and didn't print them all, you still didn't take anywhere near as many as we take now. But so the question of overt and covert has changed. But anyway, still, moreover, in the case of large public events, it's likely that not everyone photographed, filmed will have this chance to give verbal consent. So we ask for consent in a lot of situations. For example, to record the lecture on Google Meet, I have to click agree to record, even though it's me. I have to agree with myself that I will record. All right? We ask for consent in lots of circumstances, and not always is consent completely knowing. Right? Someone asks you for consent, you agree because of social pressure, you agree because it's polite, you agree because you don't know what they're really going to do, but you're not bothered. We don't always have fully informed consent of the consequences. The people of Saluk village agreed to have him in the village. They had no idea, and he had no idea of the consequences. Right? We can't always anticipate what will happen to a video. You type things on Zalo or Facebook comments, right? And you agree to make them public by doing it. But do you really understand what you are doing? That anything that you type on Facebook lasts forever? Even if you delete it on a server somewhere, someone can search it out. Look what they did with Hillary Clinton's old emails. She deleted them all, etc., but they still could get them from the server. Nothing disappears now in the digital era, so consent is changed somewhat. But nonetheless, they have this idea that you should probably try and get consent. When photographs are taken, it might be after the event that you ask for consent, or what they say, you should always try to take reasonable steps to get consent. That seems very vague to me, but still, okay. Think of all the situations in which Anthropology has been taking photographs. When Billy Hancock was photographing for Malinowski, did the Trobrianders really understand photography, what he was doing, and how, did they have any idea that 105 years later, in a whole other country, people would be talking about that photograph? Still. All right, just me, but still. There's a book by a woman called Ariella Azoulay called The Civil Contract of Photography that I really recommend you look at. This is someone who is worth choosing as your topic. She makes the case to say that in the labor, in the work, please, the work that is done in the taking of a photograph, that a contract is entered into between the person taking the photograph, joking, I'm not taking a photograph, but a contract is entered into when a person tries to take a photograph and the other person presents themselves. So you smile nicely or something, right? Her argument is that together we have produced the photograph. I did the photographing and it was on my machine, but without you, there could not be a photograph. And that puts us in a contractual relationship, and I have an obligation then to you as the co-creator of the photograph. I should think about that obligation. Not only that, she says, then we print the photograph and put it on a wall. Somebody else comes and has a look at it. Then we also, both of us, have a contract with that person looking, because they've made the photograph into a photograph. Before, it was just light and pixels. They did the work of looking, and that made the photograph exist. So they also, the photographer is not the one, the photographer has a sense of obligation to the photograph and the looker of the photograph. And this is a relationship. And that her book really changes the way you can think about being a responsible and ethical photographer. You really have to take into account whose labor is going into the making of that representation. Now, that then becomes much more interesting or much bigger when we think also of film. Maybe more difficult because the film can go across so many people. But nonetheless, the obligations of making a representation, the politics of representation can really become an interesting issue. And why I think it's important? Well, because of Billy. And because of the photograph he was taking, and how important that was. Now, sure, in this photograph, Billy didn't do the work to make, he wasn't the only one working to make the photograph. I think Malinowski, of course, said, Billy, stand over there. I'll sit with the guys. You take my photograph, right? Malinowski was directing as well. And to an extent, the Trobrianders were there as well, having their photograph taken with the big white man who comes and gives us presents of tobacco and so on, right? Now, that was 105 years ago. Today, in digital times, the structure, the old anti-colonial moment and so on is transformed by the digital. Storage, as I said, images never go away now. The Trobrianders are fixed in that image and it won't be forgotten. But neither will any bit of information. The likelihood that a photograph of you that someone takes disappears, I mean, it doesn't ever disappear completely, but the likelihood of it being seen again by someone is very rare. Most photographs that are taken remain on their original devices and never go anywhere. I would guess most of you have taken thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs and probably sent to a social media site or to a friend a fraction of those. And even of the fraction of those, very few of them are accessible now to you easily. We easily lose photographs. Though they physically really don't disappear, we don't have access anymore. And you know, software also goes out of fashion. I have a photography site somewhere called Flickr. I don't know whether it still exists. I've certainly forgotten the password, where there are thousands of photographs that I used to put on Flickr. Don't know where they are anymore. So we have a lot of redundancies. The disappearance of images, but they don't actually disappear. So data mining, and in the context of big geopolitical issues to do with nations and to do with companies, data espionage and data exploitation are huge topics that ethics really needs to consider. Who do you use this knowledge, this information, this data for? So now the ASA are rethinking their data guidelines. And they are debating it right now. Well, they're trying to debate it. Nobody really knows how to respond to the massive changes. But there's certainly discussions about how field work will be changed by data as well. The transparency about your notes, if you're a field worker, do you protect them? Do you make them completely open and public, searchable on a database? Mine are so messy, I never want anyone to see them. But, and how do we train people for ethics? If there's not a list of do's and don'ts, like I can't teach you how to behave. I shouldn't have to teach you how to behave, right? That's the parent's job or whatever. But can I teach you ethics? I don't think there's a list of do's and don'ts. I don't think that can work. Every context matters. The only thing that I can Like, I can't say, here are core principles, some concise statements that are easily remembered, because I don't think that works anymore. Yes, take lots of quinine, stay healthy, that's a good one. And don't touch the women. We go through here, it does say that in every chapter. Don't get involved with the... one page I opened straight away. Outsiders should not get involved with stealing women. Right? That's a regulation for the military. Of course they did. But I don't think we can just do that now. Like, at most, in terms of training, there are not obvious tools, but there's the concept of respect. And if you don't get the idea of respect, I think there's no hope for you. And there's reflexivity, always questioning what knowledge is used for, what are the ends. But there's not... I mean, I think usually sets of guidelines are there to be broken anyway. That's what they're for. Actually, what are sets of guidelines for? We should ask that. Are they really to guide behavior, or are they to avoid getting the institution into trouble? Right? You don't want someone to break guidelines because that may have ramifications that might mean a legal case, or it might mean some other kind of trouble. They are defensive. So we can look in detail. They have some comments on participant observation and ethical principles about how participants should know that you are doing research on a topic. Right? You should inform your participants. So I'm going to do a study on students in TDTU. I should tell you that I'm going to write about, right? If I was going to. I'm not going to. I've already done so in a different class. But I told them, right? You should not do what the Rand Corporation and the CIA did, which is pretend that they were anthropologists and actually do recruitment for the army amongst the Montagnard villages. And your field notes should be open. We've talked about that already. I've already talked about the controversies. Project Camelot, that was another counterinsurgency activity on the part of the US military, but this time in the Southern American continent, South America. And it kind of led to, eventually, it's the area where the war on drugs was mostly played out. The Tribal Research Center, I already mentioned, Chiang Mai. But there's one more that I'll mention, because this stuff, you know, Condominos is 1957. And I've been doing a history of anthropology, right, from Malinowski and Evans Pritchard. But with this topic, I kind of come up to the present. Not because the texts are contemporary, although 1975 for Kathleen Goff's, that's a bit more recent. But because what was happening with that Montagnard book, the Minority Ethnographic Studies series book, is still happening today. We haven't changed much. While we have ethical guidelines, we still also have, all right, a smaller book, but we have this book in a new form. I mean, can you imagine either of these books, this one translated by the CIA, in the backpack of one of the special ops Marines trekking through the jungle up to the highlands to talk with the Jedi or whatever. Now they have this usually hardcover, rounded, cornered book given to everyone in the armed services in Iraq or Libya or Syria and so on, the Counterinsurgency Field Manual. Now, this book was prepared by anthropologists just 17 years ago. Effort in Iraq, and it's in the same tradition as this one. The US Field Manual number 324, so the third edition. Marine Corps Warfighting Publication 333.3, forward by David Petraeus, right, names you recognize. And it has, well, basically, it's an update on this ethnographic studies thing. It's much more, it's written by anthropologists, but it includes a lot of really bad 50s sociology, actually. Out-of-date sociology, but nonetheless sociology that you use to capture enemy combatants, counterinsurgents, right? They have like logistical planning maps of insurgents. They read Mao Zedong and peasant warfare and so on. And then they do mapping and network analysis. Like this one and this one. This is a simple network. Each numbered spot is a person they've interviewed, interrogated, who knew Saddam Hussein, right? The leader of Iraq that was invaded in 2005. And this one is the degree of closeness to Saddam. So when they interviewed and located the places and the position of closeness to Saddam in the old hierarchy, they worked out who was probably meeting with him, and they followed them and worked out which town he probably was in, and then they searched. And in 2006, they found, and then they executed Saddam Hussein. Although in the run-up to the war in 2003, there were several Saddam Husseins. He had body doubles. So I'm not convinced, because afterwards, when they captured him, they didn't say anything about body doubles. Like, what happened to them? Must have been terrible to have been, your job has to be a body double of Saddam Hussein, because you're asked to look like him and act like him and be in the firing line. We don't know who he executed, actually. But anyway, by the by. This is the guidance for the Marines today. And in fact, I want to show you now a bit more detail from this. So this is the counterinsurgency field manual. Yeah. Here's its contents. Insurgency, integrating civilian and military activities, counterinsurgency. It's got a preface, you know, that it establishes fundamental principles and doctrine for military operations. They call it even an acronym, COIN, counterinsurgency. They even have learnt something from reflexive anthropology, that anthropology is about writing, so they have not written a dry policy document, but they interrupt the document with little stories, lovely little anecdotes, vignettes. A vignette is a kind of story, a small story that illustrates something. Right? So you've got your theory, blah, 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 blah. Then you tell a story to make the theory memorable, to make it stand out. Right? So there are these vignettes, different little stories that illustrate what's happening. Introduction by someone prominent. The United States possesses overwhelming conventional military superiority. Hooray! You know, this is more interesting though. They even theorize what the opposition theory is. So here they talk about Mao Zedong's protracted popular war. which means protracted people struggle, protracted peasant war in Mao's terms. So they've changed it a little bit, but they've read. Seriously, the Chinese communists used this approach to conquer China after World War II. The North Vietnamese and Algerians adapted it to fit their respective situations. They can't say the North Vietnamese defeated America, but they say respective situation. Okay. But about strategic defense, strategic stalemate, and strategic counter-offense, they're on the back foot, but they're having to spin it. They use a lot of sociology, a lot of geography, mapping, theory that's pretty common in the sociological field. As I said, they use this network stuff and other models of density, network analysis, right? And then narrative theory, exploit a single narrative. What does that mean? Well, it's the single narrative in the Vietnam era, in the American War era, or in the Cold War era, was the domino theory. If Korea falls, Vietnam falls to communism, then Indonesia will fall, then Australia will be doomed. Right? Domino theory. That was their single narrative. The communists are dangerous because they are coming. The red's under your bed. But now, in the Middle East, the narrative is Islamic terrorism, not communism. Islamism, whether it be Iraq, Iran, Libya, Egypt, Syria, what have you. So they exploit a single narrative, and they even have a way of ending the story. Finally, I want to show you something that I got when I was younger. This one is from Australia. You see it says at the top, restricted, Australian Army Manual of Land Warfare. This is a document that was liberated, recovered from a US base, a US-Australian base in the centre of Australia, where we visited. Pine Gap and Naranga are two listening bases. So espionage bases in the centre of Australia, very far from everywhere in the desert. Beautiful country. Kukida country, belongs to the Kukida people. I've tested the atomic bomb and so on. But then later it became a migration prison. But anyway, at this period, when we went there, it was a US base, and there's not much to do when you go to protest a US base in the middle of the desert. You can't really go to their facility because it's very well protected by the US Army. But we found some officers that were getting the officers was a document that showed how the Australian government was using the army to prepare to deal with protesters. And that's worth having a look also for the way in which anthropology and sociology are deployed by the military. I mean, the imperial military, right? Not the People's Army by any means. The techniques used by agitators, not protesters, agitators. Propaganda. Through the use of extensive propaganda, agitators are able to assemble people who are already incensed over real or imagined iniquities. Right? They're already imagined, these protesters. They could use leaflets, television broadcasts, word of mouth. Inflammatory oration. An inflammatory oration means speaking, right? A speech. An orator gives a speech. An inflammatory oration by a haranguing speaker is probably the most effective method of inciting a crowd to commit violence. A good speaker, using key emotional words and phrases, exploiting local prejudices, distorting facts, and using emphatic gestures, right? They can incite a crowd. The speaker may be aided by agitators who incite the crowd by chanting slogans, displaying signs or banners, staging incidents, or spreading rumours. Rumour. Right? This is what every protest is. I'm sorry. Why is the army thinking about this? Why is the army making an analysis of what like in Western democracy in Australia, this is the Australian case, would happen every day. There'd be some group protesting in the middle of the city. If you ignore them, that's it, right? Usually. Exploitation of a hate figure, right? Somebody comes in. Number E, rumour. Nothing can intensify disorder faster than the spread of emotion-provoking rumours. Dissidents and agitators use rumours to further their aims. Individuals will often start rumours out of a sense of self-importance. Well, I think the army has a sense of self-importance in having to do this analysis. Maybe I've got a sense of self-importance thinking that it's even worth talking about. But it's very interesting. They have a plan to deal with protesters. And how simplistic is it? Here's their map of what to do with a protest in the city. They're going to surround you, protesters, surround the protesters on three sides in a pincer movement. Like, it's really dumb. But anyway, or they have like a map of how to cordon off a street. They've thought through all the things for dealing with civil disobedience, protest movement. But what's most scary about this document is that they have a section on the use of force. All right, if you look at 539, firing on a mob. Before opening fire to disperse a crowd. They're going to disperse the protest, right? We've seen the crowd here. They're going to fire upon them to make them go home. Opening fire. Fire must be controlled and directed only at specific individuals by a responsible officer. This is a government sentence, an actual sentence from the responsible government. For example, an order may be, number 1 section, adopt the kneeling position. Load, man in the blue shirt. Very lucky, none of you are wearing blue shirts today. Man in the blue shirt waving an axe. Never bring an axe to a demonstration. Aim, number 3, rifleman, action, instant, 1 round, fire. This is a plan for the government to kill protesters. And then they recover the dead and wounded distribution. I mean, this is the same kind of order as the counterinsurgency manual. I haven't got the photocopy of the Australian one. But every government must have theorised through these situations and have guidelines for how to do this kind of thing. And that's phenomenal, right? There's a manual for dealing with any kind of possible protest, possible scenario. I mean, sometimes that's a good thing, right? Think of the Vietnamese government response to COVID. They did it according to a plan that they probably worked up after avian flu, right? Because that wasn't just by accident. That was a planned response and an effective one because of past experience. So sometimes the guidelines can be important and professional and good, but sometimes that's madness. I don't think we can teach good guidelines, but we can teach thinking, we can model, we can encourage, we can demonstrate how a reflexive, thoughtful, attentive scholarship proceeds. Okay. What else? That's it for today, I think. I want to just mention again, all right, the assignment. I want you to think about this piece of writing a lot. What are the methods? What are the questions that you're going to bring to ask yourself about the method that you'll use? Like, I think in every week we've done, there's been something that should be useful for you to reflect upon when you think about how you would approach whatever topic it is with your anthropologist in mind. I mean, say you chose Kathleen Goff, wherever that book is, over there. I'd say you wanted to do something about her work, and she does a visit, and she does work on visiting Vietnam, right? So it's all good. But every week we've done so far will be relevant to this, because if you read it, you can think about how some people, most people who are involved in anthropology, what they knew about Vietnam was all from an armchair, like the Victorians, right? But she went and had a look for herself. Remember, that was my slogan when we started to talk about Malinowski. But she arrives completely guided by the women's unit of the party in Hanoi. All right, they're not the police like Malinowski, but I mean, she doesn't have a completely objective, she can't have a completely objective view. What was next? Bataille, surrealism. There must be a way in which surrealism be relevant to how you go about it. The way in which she writes her diary is like an associative narrative, the metaphors she uses, the fact that 10 times more beautiful, the slogan she's picked up is, you know, you can think about that in terms of impressions of surrealism. The diary form, the style in which she writes this book owes a lot to Levi-Strauss and Tris Tropiques, right? So you could think about that. The war element, think about Evans Pritchard, or think about her role in the ethics debate. And then photography. Actually, she doesn't use any photographs. Oh, she does. Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 photographs. All of herself. All right, I haven't thought about this at all, but if you think about photography, what was she going to do? Is she the one to represent the Vietnamese people? She probably thinks no. That the women that she is with, they can represent themselves. So she represents, well, she photographs herself with them. No, she photographs herself a couple of times, but mostly she photographs projects, senior leaders and women's groups, disabled group, and a group building a dam, dike. Okay, but how, there's more photographs in the back. How does she use photographs? So every week of the course that we've been doing so far could you have something for you to think about in terms of how you write about your chosen anthropologist and how they did field work and how you would then use that style to do a field project yourself if you imagine you're doing one. I'm only asking you to imagine you're going to do one. I'm not asking you to do the actual project. You can do that next year or something, in some future time. But you can use material from every week, which is why I hope that on the Google stream, you can go back and look at the lectures that have been recorded, right? All the lectures so far are up there. Maybe you don't want to see the same thing again twice. You can always see the other class and check out if the lecture that I gave in the morning was the same as the one in the afternoon. And if you're going to see them twice, why not see the other one, the alternative? They are very similar, but I see that it's a remix, right? It's not the same every time. So that might be fun. People can email me if they want to get things in Ting Viet written by anthropologists. I got a few. Marcel Mauss, Levi-Strauss, Ruth Benedict. Or ask questions about anything we've mentioned. Or you can talk about that on the stream. Or send me an email or start a discussion on your assessment. Make sure you do the homework and ask me questions whenever. I've had about I don't know, 12 questions over the period, which is nowhere near what I expect. So please do ask. Okay, thank you. That's all for today. You can sit around for a few minutes if you want, or you can go. I'm not bothered, but I will be here if you want to ask questions. Now's the time. Please. Okay, shut off this recording. Thank you, bye.